Arc Hunter used to be extremely boring. Just flop around on the floor with combination blow like it's the Olympics and slap your enemies around like a wet fish in its final death throes. It's rinse and repeat to a mind-numbing degree and really forced you to overcommit to one extremely simplistic playstyle. But not anymore, not this build. Arc has been upgraded to Big Brain, and today we're going to talk about a build that makes Arc way more fun. It's aggressive, dynamic, and mixes really powerful offensive capabilities with good survivability and 5 different ways to apply jolting. 6 if you count the super. It's so easy to spread jolt, you'd have to actively be trying to not go full Palpatine. Instead of just relying on a dodge and melee, we're using every ability as well as tying in some really powerful arc weapons as well. Not only that, I've crafted this build in a way that still allows you to deal great damage for DPS, leaving the exotic and heavy slot open for whatever you need, as well as a great super in Gathering Storm. In addition to that, there's enough flexibility here where at base you can easily deal with 2 types of champions and even potentially all 3. So now that we've got all that out of the way, let's take a look at our build. We'll be running Gifted Conviction for our exotic armor, a good Volt Shot primary, or more realistically Indebted Kindness, and we'll be on a dedicated Arc subclass today instead of Prismatic. I wanted to crank Jolting and Arc subclass effects up to 11, and going with an Arc subclass specifically is definitely the way to go. Alright, so Gifted Conviction. I remember thinking this exotic looked so lame. I mean, even in the trailer, it kind of felt like there was some editing going on to doctor up the footage a bit. I mean, Titans shoot rockets out of their chest, and we get dumpy little skip grenades, but of course, I was pretty wrong about them, and you guys already know that because I'm like 2 months late getting this video out. Gifted Conviction is a fantastic exotic. Gifted Conviction states that Ascension and Tempest Strike throws bouncing explosives at nearby targets that jolt and damage them, and then nearby jolted targets grant stacks of resistance. Now, part of what I was missing early on with Gifted Conviction was the ability to use Tempest Strike as well. I was so dumbstruck by Prismatic for so long, I didn't even think to use this exotic on Arc, achieving its fullest potential by incorporating Tempest Strike as well. It's got 2 abilities here, and I was just not using one of them. Tempest Strike already jolts, which is great because it gives you a way to jolt targets from a small distance, but Gifted Conviction is great because those bombs will now either jolt other targets nearby who weren't caught in the initial wave, or they'll tag enemies that are already jolted and start to spread the damage. It's not so much that the little bombs do a ton of damage on their own, as much as it is a kickstart in the process, a catalyst if you will. By dealing a little bit of damage to everyone nearby, it gets the jolt chain going, and the results are really potent. This, of course, also works the same way with Ascension. Ascension jolts targets, but then the little bombs will jolt anyone else nearby and start chaining damage by tagging targets that are already jolted as well. It's a beautiful synergy. And again, if you're playing specifically on Arc, you'll have 2 abilities, not just one, that you can take advantage of Gifted Convictions first, which is exactly what we'll be doing for today's build. Conviction's good on its own, but it makes for a great getaway exotic ability too. I was using Ascension and Conviction on my early runs of Dual Destiny, and it's so helpful when you just need a second to breathe. Just use Ascension, torch all the ads, get some height. I was really surprised by the amount of times Ascension just let me fly out of the way of a Minotaur who was about to end me with that infamous slap. Part of the reason it's so good even on its own is also because of the resist stacks you gain as well, which helps a lot when you're trying to make an aggressive build. Using Ascension or Tempest Strike on a group of enemies seems to only grant a max of 2 stacks at a time. You can use other abilities like Bolt Shot or your grenades to jolt targets to increase those stacks all the way up to 4, which lasts for 10 seconds and can also be refreshed. Now, personally, with how aggressive this build is, I like to run 100 mobility so I can use Ascension a lot, and 100 resilience. 100 resilience almost feels mandatory in really intense activities like Legend Onslaught, Dual Destiny, dungeons, fill in the blank. Any really ad-dense environment's great. When you have to complete some kind of mechanic and your LFG teammate doesn't know how to read a clock, or I'm that guy at 2 a.m.
Stay with me. We're losing him! We're losing him! He's dying!
12 seconds later.
It's really helpful to have 100 resilience to buy yourself some extra time. Now at this point, add 4 stacks of resist on top of that. That is some chunky damage resist, which you're gonna need, because Conviction has a requirement that you be near enemies you jolt to receive stacks of resistance. The exotic is literally pushing you to be a menace in CQC. You can't just sit back with Tarnished Metal and proc Bolt Shot. And before we move on to talking about weapons, I did just want to mention there's a little bit in the artifact that's gonna help this Arc build. Most of it's not focused on Arc, but we do have a couple mods to work with. First one is Galvanic Armor. armor. When you have an arc or prismatic subclass equipped, incoming damage from combatants is reduced while amplified. So that's just another layer of damage resistance. Pretty great, really easy. We're getting amplified a lot with this build. Just about anything you do is going to amplify you. And then we have Shield Crush, which is going to grant increased grenade recharge and more damage for our grenade while we're amplified. So again, very easy to get amplified, some small benefits for doing so. And we're also going to be using our grenade to jolt targets as well. So it's not a huge deal. The artifact isn't really what makes this build so good, but it does contribute a little bit. Oh, hey there, it's Cobalt from the future. Or, well, the present now. Unfortunately, Act 2 Cobalt had no way of knowing that Act 3 Cobalt will be playing with some really sweet new artifact mods that takes this build from great to ridiculous. I kid you not. 2 days after recording this video, Bungie drops the details on the new artifact mods for Act 3, and one of the mods is one of the best artifact mods that we've ever gotten for Arc. Wait, maybe Bing Bong bugged my office. Alright, so finally, our choice of weapon. What's a good option up close that has Volt Shot? My goals were kind of the same here. I wanted to use something powerful, fast, good up close, but not only good up close, which, you know, all roads lead to Indebted Kindness. Indebted Kindness has become difficult to beat in the energy slot. It just offers everything we needed for this build and a little bit more. Great damage, great versatility, good ammo economy, flexibility for the rest of our loadout, and it's a special that we're using like a primary. So besides the obvious synergy of Volt Shot, we can tie it right in with Spark of Beacon. No, not wrong kind of beacons. We've already kind of covered our aspects earlier when talking about Gifted Conviction, so this flows nicely into our fragments now. For our fragments, we're running Spark of Resistance, Ions, Shock, and Beacons. Spark of Beacons states that while amplified, special or heavy arc weapons will create a blinding explosion, which is perfect for Indebted Kindness. With how easy it is to get amplified in this build, with all the arc effects flying around, this is not a problem at all. If it comes down to it, you can always just preemptively become amplified by just popping Ascension. Don't really recommend it, but it's an option. And Spark of Beacons blinding with every special weapon killed does wonders for aggressive builds. While we aren't just spamming melee, we still gotta be up close to take advantage of Gifted Conviction's resist buffs, and blinding enemies nearby non-stop does a lot to keep you alive in addition to the resistance buffs you already have. Since Indebted Kindness has such good range, you can always pop off a few shots at distant snipers to blind groups far away as well. Not a bad idea. The other fragments are great, which we'll get to, but Spark of Beacons is just kind of the glue that keeps a lot of this build together. Blinding has been a really potent effect for years, and there's a reason people are still running blinding grenade launchers as a quick swap option in Grandmasters and other high-end content. Pretty much the same case here. Really potent. The only difference here is you need to be amplified and getting kills, so it requires a certain level of aggression. Kind of like Devour builds and those like it, this Arc build requires you to keep it moving and keep clearing the room. And in case you haven't picked it up by now, I'm a huge fan of damage resistance. We might as well stack on Spark of Resistance as well, just to give us a little extra help up close. So at this point, we've got 100 resilience, galvanic armor from the artifact, a potential for 4 stacks of resist from Gifted Conviction, and now Spark of Resistance just granting passive damage reduction if you're surrounded. This really helps out in ad dense situations when you're just under fire constantly. The other 2 fragments are really straightforward. Spark of Shock so our grenades can jolt as well, just nice to have one more source of jolting in the bag. And then Spark of Ions so jolted targets will drop ionic traces when defeated, because that's going to be happening a lot. More often than my chat destroying me for liking Garden of Salvation. I love that raid, and you know what? It's not even that hard. Never mind, I'm not even going to start. Generating ionic traces here and there is a fantastic way to just feed back into your abilities and keep them regenerating so you always have at least one at your disposal. Since generating orbs with something like heavy-handed or an arc siphon is also going to be very easy, I also like to slap some mods on my leg armor that either restore some ability energy or health or shields with recuperation and better already. Any of those are a good choice, but either of the regen options are really helpful to keep your health topped off or act as an emergency regen, since there isn't really anything else directly in this build contributing to health regen. As for the rest of your mods, probably run a special ammo finder to keep Indebted Kindness topped off, some extra resist mods on your chest depending on the activity, and maybe even a special ammo finisher as an emergency just to make sure you always have enough. So up to this point we've talked about weapons, exotic armor, all our subclass details, armor mods, but not the exotic weapon yet. And that's because there isn't one. A build without an exotic weapon? Impossible. I know. Well, there's a couple reasons for this, and there are a couple recommendations. Delicate Tomb would be a great fit in this build. Lots of ionic traces, tons of ability energy going on. That would be a great fit. But Indebted Kidneys, wow. That's an interesting one, autocorrect. It's because Indebted Sell My Kidney for a God roll is just that good. It packs a huge punch, has good ammo economy, and synergizes beautifully with arc subclasses with Volt Shot. It's funny to me how underwhelming this weapon looked initially, and now how popular and dominant it is. Must be satisfying as a Bungie dev to sit back and see your creation take off like that. Well, if Whoever's there still made it anyway. The other reason I didn't want to use an exotic for this build was because that sometimes pigeonholes you into using builds like these just for lesser content, where you never really needed a good build anyways because the content wasn't that difficult. Oftentimes, if content is difficult enough, you need excellent ad clear and survivability as well as DPS. Indebted Kindness in combination with all the arc abilities at your disposal are so good that it frees up your exotic, which you can use on either your kinetic or heavy slot, really leaving it completely up to you whatever you use for damage. Not to mention Gathering Storm is a great one-off super for panic ad clear or boss damage. There's just really a lot going for this build. I really enjoy that I get to use it whenever I want to, and not just for ad clearing phases. And since sidearms are unstoppable this season, this build also works for champs. And that's one detail I really didn't spend enough time on. Indebted takes care of unstoppable champs very easily, of course, and your kinetic slide is open to take care of other champs. Personally, I like to use my Succession for anti-barrier, and Jolting, well, we definitely have that covered. That takes care of overloads really easily. Normally, I don't like to rely on subclass abilities to stun champions, but since we have 3 ways to jolt with our subclass, that's really not a problem. So I can realistically load into any activity and be able to deal with any champions very easily. And that's something I really appreciate about this build. That's the versatility I was talking about at the beginning. You can use it just about however you want. I really don't like when I'm loading up a new build just to have to deconstruct the whole thing so I can actually deal with the champions that are in the activity I'm playing. Now, as great as this build is, I want to take a moment to be straightforward and focus on some drawbacks to using this build and where it can fall short. First up, it's extremely aggressive, and if you don't like playing that way, then this may not be fun for you. It's going to require you to be aggressive to stay alive, to get close and proc the resist from Gifted Conviction, and to get close enough to use Tempest Strike and Ascension. There's inherent risk with that, and if you don't get the ball rolling fast enough, you can definitely get steamrolled. Some builds kind of have like a build-up factor as you're playing, and this one definitely has it. If you're too slow with it, it can get ugly, and you may just get Minotaur slapped. Not great. Personally, I think this build works in just about every activity except for where enemies are just super spongy, since ammo economy is a little bit of an issue, especially if you're doing double special. Grandmasters where you gotta keep your distance might be a struggle there. I think there are some where this arc build would excel, like Navoda, where things are a little bit more packed together, but you just gotta pick and choose a little bit. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I tried my best to keep it balanced and effective across the board, but no build is perfect at the end of the day. I think where Gifted Conviction and this build really shine are still high difficulty activities like dungeons, raids, Legend Onslaught, missions like Dual Destiny, encounters where you're just not gonna catch a break and need next level build crafting and ad clear just to stay alive and deal some DPS, which I think this build does quite nicely. There is a lot going on with this build, and it's really great just getting a new ability and adding it into old subclasses and seeing how much life it injects into them. This build is way more fun than just rolling around and slapping enemies repeatedly. I'll leave a dim link in the description and the comments as well, so definitely head down there so you can give it a try yourself and let me know what you think. What changes would you make? If you enjoyed the video today, definitely leave a like. I appreciate you sticking around till the end, and if you want to see more builds and helpful videos like this, then definitely subscribe. I also stream occasionally as well, so make sure to turn on notifications for that as well. There's also a Discord in the description. I keep people updated there as well. We also run something called Trials of Cobalt, where you can challenge me in 3v3 Trials style combat, and I have to delete god rolls if I lose. It's kind of a weekend activity, kind of a community thing. It's always a great time, so definitely stop over for that. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Catch you guys next time.